Hello, everybody, and welcome to this keynote on thinking holistically about quality and testing. Before we start, by the way, I'm Janet Gregory, and before we start, I'm going to apologize for my voice. I've just gotten over a cold, and so it's kind of a little bit shaky, a little growly, so don't mind me. So I started as a programmer. I did that for about 6 years, and then I was promoted to quality manager. It was a very chaotic kind of company, and I was the only programmer who was constantly trying to improve the process. So who should I be? Quality manager. So I learned everything there was to learn about testing and quality assurance. At least I thought so. But I found I couldn't change that company. So I changed jobs and moved to an agile team as a tester. My whole view of software development changed in that job. And then I started sharing what I learned, started going to conferences, speaking, training, even wrote 4 books, working on my 5th. But my focus has always been about quality, even when I was that programmer. I like to start with quotes. I think it makes people think a little bit. And I saw this someplace, I have no idea where, probably Facebook. It made me think, so I hope it makes you think as well. If your mind is a garden, your thoughts are the seeds. You can grow flowers or you can grow weeds. Very simple, but really quite thoughtful. What we do and what we say has implications. Each of us, we have far greater influence on others than we can possibly hope. When I started sharing my message, I never really thought about it, but over the years, I realized that every single person I talk to, if something I says influences them, then they change a little bit. So I hope each of you continue to do so and spread the word. So I've been thinking a lot over the last year or two about the relationship between development, which includes testing, and how we manage quality in our products. So there's a definite relationship between the two, but they are not the same thing. So I'll start a little bit with kind of about talking about quality, and then how testing from a holistic perspective supports that quality conversation. So I'm hoping to be online for this talk so that I can respond to chats, but it will be on at 2 a.m. my time. So I'm not guaranteeing that I'll wake up in time. However, if I'm there or not, I do hope you use the chat to offer opinions and share with each other, even if I'm not there. But I hope to see you. So having a conversation about quality is difficult, no matter how you try. So I like to use something simple, and I use coffee as an example, because it's out of the software world, so we don't get hung up on a lot of things. If you don't like coffee, think tea or something else. And I know this is a recorded presentation, but I still want you to stop and think about this. Which cup of coffee do you think is best? Now, based on previous replies, because I've shown this one before, it's probably a pretty even split. Myself, I prefer that plain black cup of coffee. I'm not a fan of cappuccinos. Now, how did you choose? How did you know from a picture which is the best cup of coffee? Think about why you chose that. Do you prefer plain black like me? Or do you like lots of foam? Or maybe the pretty design even is what caught your interest. Now, I asked my sister this question, and I said, when you think about a cup of coffee, what is it that you like? And so she started off talking about the best cup of coffee she has is when she goes to her little coffee shop, kind of just around the corner from her place. She walks in, the barista makes her cappuccino and has a nice little conversation. And then she takes her coffee and she goes and she sits in the nice comfortable chairs and reads her book for a while. And so when she started talking about this and started sharing this, I said, so do you not think about the coffee at all? Because she hadn't mentioned it. And she goes, oh no, it's a good cup of coffee. But what she talked about and what her perception was all about the ambiance, the environment that provided that great cup of coffee she liked. So when you were thinking and choosing, did you think about the quality of the coffee itself? Maybe the beans, where it came from? Now, if I add another dimension like price, would you choose the same cup of coffee? Or would you change your mind? And if you change your mind, is it because you now think about the value for the price? Perhaps if I gave you more information, like the service or the environment where it was being served, would that affect your perception of which one was best? Because perhaps you can get all three of these at the same cafe or coffee shop. But would you pay more or less? What if you were getting them at a gas station or someplace like that? Would you pay more for that cappuccino? No ambiance. But let's look at a different perspective on quality. I'm going to make it a little bit more real. So think about your favorite website. This is Amazon. You could consider YouTube or something else. How would you define quality for this website? What things would make it a quality product? Start putting them in the chat as I continue kind of talking. What things would you look for from a quality perspective on this? Perhaps something like easy to navigate or easy to find things, because on Amazon, one of its biggest things is the ability to search. Sometimes I get a little frustrated because I look at books. I only want to look at books, and then it shows me all kinds of other things. And that frustrates me a little bit. So it goes down a little notch or two. Maybe things like accurate results. Those are all quality attributes. What about other things that are not functional? Like risks. What quality attributes do you need to test for risks? Some of the ones on the previous page was about usability. But maybe there's other things like, is it out of date? Because you wouldn't want to sell things that you couldn't sell because they don't make them anymore. How do you make sure that everything advertised is current? What about privacy for the customer? Maybe keeping credit card information, for example, or maybe showing incorrect suggestions. And there's always all these other kinds of things like ransomware and scary stuff like that. What other kinds of risks can you think of? Drop them in the chat if you think of anything. The other question that needs to go with risk is, what is the most important? And who is it important to? So let's kind of talk about that for a moment, because quality, it contains a lot of connotations, and it changes meaning depending on the perspective of who's looking at it. This little cartoon is a great example, right? If the person on the left is looking at that number and sees a 9, the person on the right looks at it, sees a 6. Is either right or wrong, just different perspectives. How can we meet? How can we understand those perspectives? Now, a few years ago, and this is one of my favorite stories, so I tell it a lot. My grandson, we were on vacation in Hawaii, and my grandson and son-in-law were on the balcony, and they were looking out over the ocean. And my grandson, who was about 5, I guess, 4 or 5, said, "Hey, Daddy, look, the cars are driving on the water." And his dad, of course, says, "No, Braden, they're not driving on the water. They're driving on the bridge." And my grandson was quite insistent. And he said, "They're on the water. They're driving on the water." And of course, my son-in-law was equally as insistent. And it was getting to be quite a little heated discussion. I'll call it a discussion. Anyhow, my granddaughter, who was about 7, went out on the balcony and just kind of crossed her arms and went, I could just hear her, what was going on in her brain. But anyhow, she said, "Daddy, come here, bend down." So he bent down and she said, "Look at what Braden sees." And sure enough, the cars look like they're driving on the water because they're looking through glass on the balcony. And then my granddaughter said, "Now, Dad, pick him up, show him what you see." And of course, the cars are actually on the bridge. Their viewpoints were so different, and they couldn't see each other's point of view until a little 7-year-old girl come and showed them. So when we're having conversations in our story readiness meetings or backlog refinement meetings, and there's discussions about what we mean, really stop and just say, how can we come to a conclusion about what we mean? Maybe you have to visualize it. Maybe you have to change places. Maybe a little bit of listening instead of talking. If we think about risks that we have identified, different people will have different risk tolerances. So you have to ask the question, who matters? All stakeholders, all users? Who's important? What's the most important? Have that discussion. Now, customers, they're the most important, right? Do we know all our customers? Do you know all of your customers? Amazon surely can't, right? How do we use their product? Everybody will be different. We can do things like use personas, right? But there's other stakeholders like the sellers, the people selling the products, or the logistics. How do we get it there? So from a customer perspective, or at least one customer's perspective, quality might mean fitness for use, their customer satisfaction. But there's others. And then there's product value. So if we think about the coffee, how much are you willing to pay for specific features, for the ambiance, or the perceived value of the product? Because one perspective is the company itself. Are they making enough profit? Do they depend on volume and price, or a higher price for less volume? Do you know what your organization does? Do you know what value customers get from your product? From the product perspective, quality means maybe the degree of excellence at an acceptable price. Perhaps that's the value. And then the third thing is process. How well do we create our products? We have to think about process design, standards, specifications, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a bit. But there's so many perspectives and viewpoints. We could think of internal, inside the company, versus external, somebody else looking in or looking at the product. So let's look at that website again. If we think about customers, some of the people using this website, Maybe there's some who want the latest deals, always checking. Maybe there's people who want to buy things very quickly, repeat customers. There's people that, and it goes on and on. It could be endless. So when we're testing, do we have to think about testing for all of those people? Perhaps. But it might depend on a specific feature or a specific risk we're trying to mitigate. Product value. Why do people shop through Amazon instead of going to a store? Does the website provide that value? In North America, or Canada, where I'm from, we have this thing called Amazon Prime. I have no idea whether you do or not. Pay a monthly fee and we get free delivery. We also get a TV channel. Does Amazon Prime actually add value to people? If so, which people? To all people? Maybe only to some who are repeat customers. Maybe others don't care. Product quality may be many, many things. It might be that ease of use. It might be safety. For example, on this website, I've taken off the top for now, but it shows my name and shipping address. It remembers me. What if somebody else brings up this website on my computer? Is that a safety issue for Amazon? Or is it a safety issue for me and I need to take full ownership? We need to think about some of these risks and decide as an organization what we want to and what we don't want to support. So on the browsing history, if I think about accuracy, I can see everything I've looked at lately. Although I really don't remember looking for mouse killer. So I'm thinking that there's a bug in the history. I don't know. I didn't check it out. But what I like is that I have some control over this page. I can turn it off or on. I can remove everything if I don't want anybody else to see, because you never know what a person's going to be looking at, right? As testers, we need to be able to look at different things like quality attributes and asking questions about why we might need this information. Is there a regulatory reason? For example, GDPR in Europe. Maybe we shouldn't be storing all the information that marketing wants us to. As testers, we need to think beyond functionality. We need to understand that quality perspective from all different types of angles. It's not enough to think about what we ourselves think is important. Now, so far, I haven't even talked about the process of building. And we really need to determine what is important first before we think about the how. And a lot of teams I see kind of get that mixed up. They jump into the let's go build it and then end up doing a lot of rework, right? So let's talk about process right now, specifically testing in a holistic manner. So how do we build quality into our product? One way, not the only way, but one way is to start thinking about testing differently. So Elizabeth Hendrickson has this amazing quote, and I've been using it for years. Testing is not a phase. It is an activity that happens throughout the delivery life cycle. So when we start to think about testing as an activity, it changes how we do things. So let's go back to our coffee. Process for making a cup of coffee. It starts when we first plant that coffee bean, right? How we grow it, the altitude it's grown at, the time it's planted. It's also about the time it's getting picked. It's about the roasting. Do you like it dark? Do you like it light? Do you like oil on it, or do you like it dry? So, for example, our coffee maker doesn't like oil on beans, so we have to buy the dry beans. My husband likes dark roast. I like medium roast. So our coffee machine has a little, I can add extra water so that it's not so strong for me. How do you like your coffee? How's it roasted? But the process continues right up until we serve the coffee. The operations behind the coffee shop. It starts with the environment it's grown in and continues right up until the barista puts that pretty design on top, if that's what you choose. And then the customer, and only then, does the customer take their first sip, and they can judge the quality of that coffee. It's the taste, it's the ambiance, it's everything around them that determines how they perceive that quality. But the process of getting there, that does affect their perception. So holistic testing is really a comprehensive term to encompass testing throughout the development lifecycle, from the start of an idea right through to customer interaction with the feature. Really thinking about how the delivery team interacts, how they think about testing from the very beginning, right up until the customer's using it. So how did I come up with this model, and how does it relate to testing and Agile? Well, many people, and I still see it, so I'm we'll take it with a grain of salt. I'll generalize, but many people still think testing starts after we have code in our hands, and talk about testing as testing code. But we might have detailed tests before we code, but maybe they only get performed after the code. That mindset is on this right part of this delivery loop, right? And we want to change that. We want more collaboration throughout this whole cycle. And the infinity loop is a great way to think about the development cycle. I dislike, let me put it that way, the idea of a linear line, to say it, because that's got a stop and an end, and delivery cycles aren't like that. They don't have a stop and an end, and I'll explain why. So Dan Ashby took the typical DevOps cycle that really has no mention of testing except in one phase after coding. But Dan shows in this continuous testing loop how testing is involved throughout. It's not a phase, right? It's we test here and here and here at every single little place. And I really like this model, but I think he put a little bit too much emphasis on the branch coding and merging. So instead I created this model. So I changed the infinite loop to something that made more sense to me from a testing perspective. So typically a development cycle would start at the discover stage, right? At a high level, what it is that we want, what do we need? And then we plan at a high level, right? We want to see what we need to do, maybe. We understand, we go to build, you deploy it to development environments, test environments, you release it to your customers, you observe what they are doing, and hopefully you'll learn something. And then you move on to discover new things. Now I've put some pauses in this infinite loop. That's the little double lines in there. And it's not a gate, right? But the pauses are to show that we need to kind of stop and reflect. Are we ready for the next stage? So for example, if we were building and we went to deploy and we found out our smoke test said failed, and we have to go back to build. Or perhaps we're in understanding and we want to build, maybe we ask ourselves, are we ready? Whatever your definition of ready is, are we ready to build? Maybe we don't have all our dependencies managed. Then let's go back and just understand a little bit better so that we don't have to stop in the middle of the building. There's really no beginning and no end. Sometimes we'll go slow. Sometimes the stage will go very quickly. For example, if you've done something before and you're just repeating it, like, I don't know, can't think of anything offhand, but sometimes you will do the same thing almost again and again. That'll go very quickly. But if you're starting with something totally new, you will go slower and much slower. So we move from the left to the right and then back again and continue on that infinite loop, just around and around and around. The model, I call this is the model, a holistic testing model. And these are examples of the types of testing to consider. I started using the term holistic. Dan used continuous testing, but I changed it to say use holistic because I found that the word continuous has been hijacked by some of the tool vendors to mean automation only. Maybe they don't mean that, but that's what it sounds like. And I know that there's many, many different types of testing that we do in this loop. And it's not only about testing software. So in Discover, at the beginning, there's a new feature. They've decided they have this new feature. The business folks think about that and determine if the idea has value. They are testing their ideas. Does it make sense from a business perspective? If an organization doesn't have a consistent message in their vision, or they have competing priorities. So I'll see this when a team has a feature and they started this feature and then a product owner says, nope, we've got to do this one, it's more important now, put that aside. Oh, nope, we're back to this one. And when that happens, this is a really good time to stop and reflect. Maybe you have to go back to discover what is it that is really important to the business folks and have them decide, because it should not be the team that's getting hung up on this. So planning is about testing early. This is often where testers can add the most value using their critical thinking skills, asking what if questions, because those what if questions help surface risks. For example, if I ask a product owner, what's your biggest risk? I usually get I don't know. They have no idea what their biggest risk is. But if I ask them, what is the worst thing that can happen? They'll tell me very quickly. Or what don't you want to see in the front page of the newspaper tomorrow? They can tell you that very quickly. Those are often the biggest risks. So start asking those questions. Another thing we can do during planning is helping to break down stories so that they're testable, helping to understand the scope of the story, thinking about the what quality attributes are important. Remember, I talked about the risks and what is the most important. The quality attributes. Does everybody think security is the most important? Or is scalability? Or maybe recoverability? Maybe it's performance. I don't know. Does everybody have the same understanding of what is the most important quality attributes to test? Now, in our Amazon example, depending on the feature, we might have to, maybe we have something new because we're integrating in a new product line. So we have to think about that integration. Maybe our logistics have become the most important thing because we have decided we're going to start shipping to, I don't know, Antarctica. How are we going to calculate delivery charges there? How are we even going to deliver it? So all of a sudden, our risks will change. What we test might change. So we've discovered, we're planned, and now we need to understand in more detail. So if we have a story and we're getting ready, we want to get it ready for building. That's the idea. So we need to understand the scope of the story or the feature. We can think about test data. This is where practices like acceptance test-driven development or behavior-driven development really come in handy, because they can help us figure out, are we building the right thing? Do we understand what we're building? Other tools that I like to use are example mapping. And if you haven't tried it, it's a simple way to really understand the business rules. And you can look up Matt Wynn, Google Matt Wynn and example mapping, and he's got a couple of nice blog posts on that. But it's working to say, do we understand our business rules? And then thinking about examples to express those. I like to use a simple example like adding two numbers together. Everybody knows how to do that. It should be simple to code. But if I start working through some examples like 1 + 1 = 2, and then I'll say, but what about 1.0 + 1 = 2? Do we want to show the decimal place? How many decimal places are we going to go to? We start adding more examples, and then we start saying, oh, are we going to be rounding or are we going to be truncating? How are we going to show negative numbers? All of a sudden, a very simple adding two numbers can get quite complex. So really think about using something like example mapping. Again, we're testing our ideas and our understanding of what we're going to build. So when we're ready, we go into building. That's coding and automating and testing, not necessarily in that order. You automate the checks so that you have regression testing to get fast feedback, unit tests maybe by the programmers, maybe we test the business rules through the API, maybe we even automate our workflows through the user interface, keeping that to a minimum, right? But working together as a team, we want to look to see how we can get the fastest feedback. So things like, I call it a show me, I've heard it called desk checks. It's one of my favorite ways to get feedback or to give feedback. So when the programmer says, hey, Janet, I finished coding this story, can I show you? I'll go over to the programmer's desk, I'll sit beside them. The programmer shows me what they have been doing and what it is. I'll ask questions. Any bugs we find during that show me, we're still in development. And then what I like to do is I like to pair with the programmer while I fix it, because we can code and test it at the same time. I might test it again in the staging or in the test environment, but we can get really fast feedback. And we want to think about that feedback. How can we make it the shortest amount possible? So we're thinking coding and testing, testing and coding. It's all part of the same process. How can we make that little piece as short as possible? And then we get to deploy. Now, code has been written and it has been deployed. And maybe to the development environments, to run smoke tests, maybe to test environments, maybe even to prod. Much of what we see here is automated, but there's likely some human-centric testing activities as well, like exploratory testing. It's also probably the first opportunity you really get to test some of those quality attributes, like load, performance, stability, recovery. What we're looking for is, again, fast feedback. What is the shortest time we can get that feedback? In the book I wrote with Selena DeLisi, Assessing Quality Practices, our very first quality practice, which we think is, we've put it as number one, the most important thing, is feedback cycles. Because if you have short feedback cycles, then you can adjust, you can learn quickly, you can adapt. And so how teams make feedback cycles short, and part of that learning is very telling with a company, with a team, to say how well their processes are going. Are they building quality in? Are they getting that fast feedback? And then we get to release. This is giving it to the customers so that they can actually access the new capability. But before we actually turn it on, perhaps teams now are using things like feature toggles or blue-green environments. And I'm not going to go into any of those details, but we can use it to look at features in a production environment without actually releasing it. There's ways to do it safely now. But once we give it to the customers and turn it on, then we want to observe. Our features are in production. Our customers are using those features, hopefully, because we built the right ones. And this is where we get to observe. So in understanding, part of that of understanding was to think about what we needed to put in to instrument the code for monitoring or for observing. We build it in, and now we're observing. And so that's where it kind of comes full circle. How do the customers use our product? Does it provide the value that we think it should, that they think it should? Can we detect errors earlier than the customer? Ideally, fix them before they even know it happened. But as we continue around the loop, we get to the learn. And learning is experimenting, right? If we approach it with a scientific mindset, form a hypothesis. We think or we believe that if we do this, it will improve this, right? If we use those lightweight type of experiments, and measurement is a part of it, it can be a very valuable way to try new ideas and techniques. There's a saying, and I haven't heard it for a while, which makes me happy, fail fast. I actually prefer the word or the phrase learn fast, because that's what experimentation is. Let's learn quickly so that we can adapt. So that's really it. The left side of this model is about preventing defects from getting in the code, about building quality into the product, into the code. Are we building the right thing? The right side of this loop is about observing. It's about finding defects and fixing them as quickly as possible. The right side is about making sure we're meeting customer expectations. And as a little aside, Lisa Crispin talks in more detail about this model in her talk. This is a very high level, and she'll get into more detail. So as a collaborative, high-performing team, everyone on that team needs to understand what the customer expectations are. It's kind of the foundation of our work. It's not enough to make sure that the product works. It needs to satisfy the needs of the customer. And to do that, we have to understand our customers. We have to understand our stakeholders. If your teams are not talking about quality first, you have an opportunity to start that conversation, and I really encourage you to. Otherwise, if you don't have that conversation about quality, about risks, how are you going to know what testing needs to be done? How will you know what risks to consider? I'm just going to mention this the Assessing Quality Practices book that I talked about, we have 10 different quality aspects. And it's not only testing practices. In fact, there's very little about testing practices itself. But quality starts with those feedback loops that I talked about. The second thing that's really important is the culture. So if a team or an organization, for example, doesn't enable the environment for the team to grow and flower, to bloom, to experiment, to get better, how is the team going to improve? Communication. If the communication is always top down, how is the team ever going to be able to say, hey, look what we learned? Can we share with other teams? It's really important to have some of those basics down before you even start talking about some of the other quality practices, like the development and practices that teams do, like the testing practices. And there's a lot of those things as well, but if you don't have feedback loops built in, if you don't have a culture that encourages learning, encourages improvement, if you don't have communication going back and forward through all different levels of your organization, it makes it very difficult to put quality into your products. The team supports the level of quality that we want in our product. Testing supports the level of quality. It does not replace it. It does not replace the whole team, the delivery team, from building it in from the very beginning. So teams have to learn how to talk about it. Now, I've been talking about the whole team, and not only the testers with respect to quality. Testers bring essential skills. They lead the team in talking about quality, right? But it is not their responsibility by themselves. It takes the team's commitment to make it work. Defining product quality belongs to the business stakeholders. But testers can ask really good questions. The whole team can, but testers specifically, they know those risks. They're asking those questions. Don't wait till the code is written and you ask those questions to the product. Ask them early. Help those business folks think about what's valuable to their customers. And then there's also the process quality. How do we build the right product? And that definitely belongs to the team and the organization, right? You have to have the right environments, test environments, production environments, and all of those things. Those things all contribute to product quality. They don't define it, but they contribute. Just think back on that coffee, the beans, the picking, the roasting. So when you think about your products, what do your customers look for? How do they judge quality? How can you get fast feedback from each other in the team, but also from your leadership, from your customers? And then think about you and your team and how you can contribute to building that quality in. In fact, I encourage you folks to sit there right now and think about, how do you contribute your quality to your product? If you're really brave, put it in the chat. So fast feedback, collaborating, visualizing your work, things like putting your pipeline up on the wall, or drawing flow diagrams to get your testable stories. Make it visible. It helps talk about it. And then, of course, continual learning means a no blame culture, enable people to innovate, to get better. It means mistakes will be made, but without mistakes, it's hard to learn. You can learn without making mistakes, but it makes you learn faster. So using that scientific mindset, experiment, grow, find new opportunities. So I'll end this talk with a quote. This one is from Edward Deming, 1982, when he did his 14 key principles for business effectiveness. I still believe those principles are alive and well in agile and effective agile teams and organizations. My only issue with this particular quote is that the idea of productivity is really often misunderstood. And so that kind of makes this just a wee bit off sometimes. The second quote is one of mine. If you focus on quality, the speed will come. If you focus on speed, the quality will get lost. I see companies transitioning to agile. They concentrate on the idea of speed, getting it to market fast, and they forget all about the quality, which in the end has an adverse effect because it makes them slower. So focus on the quality, the speed will come. And with that, I'll say goodbye and hopefully see you in the chat. Here's my contact information. If you choose to want to send me an email or anything else, please do. So with that, I'll say goodbye and see you in the chat, hopefully.